everyone, and welcome back to the NXpress Nintendo Podcast, the official podcast of GoombaStomp.com. I'm your host, Cameron Daxon. Joining us, we also have games editor Marc Kaliroff.
Cameron, what have you been reading this week?
You're going to find out very shortly. Actually, I've been reading some birthday presents that you, Marc Kaliroff, got for me, but we'll get around to that. We also have with us indie games editor Campbell Gill.
All I've been reading are boring English major books, so, it's not my birthday, unfortunately. Yeah.
We're going to wrap back around to that because there is one English major book in particular that ties into a game that you've been playing, which I'm so excited to get to. Marc, to go back to your previous question, first, I've been reading the Persona 5 manga that you got for me. Also, been reading the God of War novelization that you also got for me. But most importantly, and for the purposes of this podcast, I've been reading the Ask Iwata book, which is a new book that just came out, sort of an autobiography of Iwata, the former CEO of Nintendo, may he rest in peace, or I guess president. Was he the CEO or was he the president? I'm already off to
president.
Yeah. After Yamauchi. So it's been a really fascinating read. I did not know very much about Iwata before he passed away. He was never really on my radar. I was familiar with Yamauchi. Obviously, I know Miyamoto, though Miyamoto was never president. Familiar with Reggie. All the major players. I've kind of knew who they were. Iwata didn't really know what he was all about. But as I've been reading this book, it's interesting. It's kind of part autobiography, part management advice, part compilation of the Iwata'S interviews that were online somewhat recently. It's a great read. If you have any interest at all in the history of Nintendo, in just kind of Nintendo's business practices, and just the life and the kind of the day-to-day actions of a really, truly a genius, it's a great read. Marc, I know you were very familiar with the life and legacy of Iwata. Do you want to kind of clue us into that?
Yeah, so Satoru Iwata, he first started at HAL Laboratories, and he helped design the NES game Golf, and then he went on to do Kirby, and then eventually, after all these games he did, Nintendo wanted him to come over and work for them, and he ended up being the president of HAL Laboratory at one point, created Super Smash Bros. With Masahiro Sakurai, and then he went on to work full-time for Nintendo, and he made the DS, the Wii, he helmed the late GameCube days, went on to do Wii U, and then finally the Switch.
A pretty stunning legacy when you look at it. It's like when you list it off back to back like that, it's phenomenal. He was truly a transformational figure.
His list of accomplishments is mind-blowing.
Well, and
what's great about he's done is incredible.
Yeah. Well, and what's great about him, what's fascinating reading this book, is that I don't know. Do you guys read a lot of autobiographies or biographies?
Not typically.
Not really.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah. I usually don't either. Oftentimes, if it's an autobiography, it can come across as very braggy. Like I used to read. Autobiographies by actors or directors, and it was always oh boy, he's gonna talk about how when I came up with this da-da-da-da-da, it's all right, calm down. But the way that Iwata describes himself, describes his business practices, it's very humble, and I don't know if that's just the Japanese sensibility or it's just who he was as a person, but he's very much he started from the bottom. He started off as just a guy who was interested in computers and programming, and just through a series of stepping up to the plate when it was needed, rose to the top of Nintendo. But it was never I'm going to ruthlessly cut down everybody in front of me so I can be the top of the heap. It's not at all that. It was just very much well, here's what I think I should do, and if nobody else can do it, then I will step up and do it. And it's fascinating. And it's just cool to see a very humble guy describe himself and describe what makes things tick at Nintendo, or at least what made things tick during his time there. So it's been a really great read. In my real life, in my non-podcasting life, I am a restaurant manager, and to read about Iwata describing how to take an interview, or like questions he would ask potential employees is very eye-opening. It's simple stuff. It's kind of down-to-earth, basic management stuff, but at the same time, it feels like a very fresh perspective, just because the end result being, the Wii, the Switch, the DS, all these things. It's like, wow, that kind of innovation really comes when you're paying attention to the basics. So it's pretty cool. One of the quotes I should say that really caught my eye is he kind of interspersed throughout each chapter of this book. There's a couple little lines that is called Iwata'S words of wisdom. And they kind of put them in maybe every other chapter. There's like 2 or 3 pages and it's just quotes of him. And he has this great quote about the mission of Nintendo, kind of when he was on charge there. And he says, creating things that people can enjoy regardless of age, gender, or background. And it's like, again, pretty basic stuff. Yeah, if you're an entertainment company, you want things that can be enjoyed by anybody at any time. But a lot of people don't do that. Case in point, recently my wife has been interested in the Switch Lite. And so finally over the weekend, I picked her up one. And I think it's because of that philosophy of creating a product that can be enjoyed by anybody at any time that had really caught her eye. And so that's what we did. And so far it's been a great experience. Mark, of course, I went with your suggestion and got her Animal Crossing. And so far it seems to be the right call.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Now get Stardew Valley.
I wonder if they would be not contradictory, but like, would they be filling the same niche? I don't know.
Okay, yeah, that's right. Okay, so then what you do is you wait for her to get burnt out on Animal Crossing, and then pick up Stardew.
Swap it out for Stardew. That's pretty good. I picked up the Link's Awakening remake as well because I feel like she would enjoy that.
Nice.
Yeah. So I would say it's less of a straightforward like here is the exact things this guy worked on and did. It's kind of more of a holistic approach to his work and his legacy. But if you're interested in seeing how this guy started small and became the president, it's a pretty great read.
Does it talk about like some of his crazy stories? Like I know one of my favorites that he did was for the Pokemon Company for when they were making Gold and Silver on the Game Boy. They could only fit the Johto region on the cartridge, and then he invented from like scratch a compressing tool and managed to fit both Kanto and Johto in the game.
Oh, it's funny. So there's maybe a few less specifics like that, but the philosophy behind that is very evident. Like he talks about how he and Miyamoto kind of came to be working together, and how because Miyamoto. He's not a programmer. He's familiar with computers. Obviously, he knows how they work, but he's not like I'm a coder. I'm gonna create all the code for these brand new games. So they talk about kind of the philosophy of sitting down, talking to designers, and being like, all right, what can you do, or like what's the roadblock that we're running into? And if they say like, hey, this is impossible, then Miyamoto would be like, all right, great. So explain to me what the roadblock is. And then he'll kind of be like, all right, well, what if you try it this way? Can you do this? Or if you do it this way, would that allow you to do this? And like through those kinds of conversations, they're able to do stuff like what you just described, Mark, being able to find a programming workaround to get an entire other region onto a cartridge. Yeah. So there's maybe a few less of those kinds of specifics, but there's some of that in there.
Yeah, because he was a guy when he saw the problem, he immediately fixed it. Or when he was given a task and didn't have the information to complete it, he invented the information.
Exactly, he figured it out for himself. And
like another one of my favorites is with Pokemon Stadium on the N64. When they made that game, it was like he didn't have the design documents of how the battle system worked in Pokemon. So all he did was he played through the game. And then he looked at the internal code and then managed to port basically the entire game to the N64.
Oh my gosh. That's wild.
And he did it almost by himself too, which is crazy.
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing. And so, again, whether or not this is a healthy practice for your personal life is up for debate. But he does talk about how, like, yeah, if I need to be the one to step in and do the thing, then I will do that. And it's like, and again, he doesn't brag about it. It's not like I'm the only one who's smart enough to do this kind of stuff. It's just like, oh well, if nobody else is able to figure it out, I guess somebody has to, so that'll be me. And so that kind of work ethic is extremely evident throughout, which is it's cool. It's a genuinely a very pleasant read.
Did
so
it
yeah,
also,
I don't know,
just one last question, did it go into his
Sure.
family by any means?
It's mostly focused on the Nintendo stuff. I mean, he talks a little bit about his history and like kind of growing up and stuff like that, but it's mostly focused on the Nintendo stuff.
Because I know his whole family is like politicians, and they like still are. Like, I'm pretty sure he was the only one in the family that was in the games business.
That is fascinating. It doesn't talk so much about that, no. Because yeah, it's less of like, here is my history. It's more focused on like the moments in time that led to him being at Nintendo, or his actual time at Nintendo. I would say is generally the focus. But there's a lot of great stuff in here that would actually kind of lead us into our next little topic, because he's, through the course of working at HAL Laboratory and working at Nintendo, he grew close with Shigesato Itoi. Well, I hope I'm pronouncing that right. The guy who created Earthbound. The Earthbound creator. So there's a great bit that I actually just read right before recording, where he talks about how when Earthbound was several years into development and they brought on Iwata to kind of help speed the process along, and he looked at what they had and he said, listen, we can use what we have, and it will take 2 years to finish this game, or we can start from scratch and finish it in 6 months. And they scrapped the whole thing and finished it in 6 months. Exactly. But he does give credit to everybody who worked on it by saying, like, well, listen, the amount of work that they did up to that point, it wasn't wasted. It let them hit the ground running from a fresh perspective. So that kind of, I don't know what you want to call it, that kind of wisdom is kind of sprinkled in throughout these kinds of stories and anecdotes as you read the book. So yeah, it's a great read. I think if you're at all interested in the history of Nintendo, it's nice to get it's very rare to get a first party source like this. So yeah, I think it's worth a read for sure. But yeah, that was kind of my windbag way of saying there's some Earthbound stuff in here. Speaking of Earthbound, how about that Mother 3 anniversary for a game that we will probably never see in the West?
Because I love how Nintendo has just rolled out the red carpet for Mother for the 15th anniversary. And I also love Reggie teasing the English version that totally exists, that he's been playing all the time, apparently. So
that Reggie tweet was brutal.
On the one hand, I'm nearly certain he's just trolling, but on the other, I'd love to imagine that there is an English version of Mother 3 just locked away in Redmond somewhere, and just Reggie just comes over to stare at it every now and again. They never take it out, though. So
yes, Doug Bowser now has the keys to the vault.
Yeah, well, Bowser got sued recently too, so you know.
Yeah, how insane
Gary
is it
Bowser.
that a hacker named Bowser, like, that's got to be fake, right? Like, come on.
But and he gets sued by a company that's run by somebody named Bowser. Bowser sues Bowser. It's insane. It's
that movie starring Meryl Streep and Dustin Hoffman, Bowser versus Bowser. I think I remember that one. Yeah, I've unfortunately never played Mother 3. I know there's like emulators online available. I think you can kind of can you legally purchase the Japanese version, or is that even out of print at this point?
Yeah, believe it or not, the Earthbound games in Japan are pretty easy to find.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, it's just in America, if you want a copy of Earthbound on the Super Nintendo, well,
yeah, right.
Good
Hope
luck.
you're ready to pony up some cash for that. Yeah, who knows? I really would love to see some kind of form of this sequel at some point in the future. I mean, 15 years of anniversary? That's significant. I know people have been clamoring for it in one way or another. From what I understand, there's some controversial stuff in the original release that perhaps has not aged as well for a 21st century audience. But I don't know if that's like the reason they're holding back, or they just kind of figure there's no money in it. Like, I'm not really sure.
Yeah, it definitely. I've played the game, or the majority of it, through means I cannot say, but it does definitely have some themes that I think would be a bit sensitive towards some Americans specifically.
Sure.
So
Sure.
I can see if they were holding it back for that reason. Like, there's some stuff in the game that I feel like would not. Well, I'm pretty sure, the majority of people playing it would hopefully be intelligent enough to go, oh, okay, and, I accept this or whatever and move on.
Or just understand that it's a product of its time.
Well, not even that. It's just the themes in the game are, believe it or not, like, relevant by today's standard.
Interesting, okay.
Yeah, I don't want to go too deep into it, but there's definitely some stuff that some people in this country would, for some reason, cause panic over for no reason.
That sounds so incredibly ominous. I love it.
I know. I'm like, all right. That's so fun. I remember playing. I played Earthbound for the first time not very long ago, to be honest. Maybe 3 years ago or so. Maybe 4
Super
years
Nintendo
ago.
Classic?
No, I actually played it on my new Nintendo 2DS.
Oh, okay.
Oh, wow.
Because that version of the DS could actually play Super Nintendo games.
Mm-hmm.
And so I wanted to play it handheld, so I did, and it rules.
Yes, it's amazing. It's one of my favorites.
I was utterly shocked by how well that game had held up. So I could only imagine that the sequel, like, mechanically, is just as good, the Mother 3.
Yeah, it's the same mechanics for the most part. It's just obviously they made it on the GBA, so it's a lot more fluent, especially with the save system and fast travel.
Right,
and
of course, yeah.
all that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I don't know. I hope maybe one day we can get we can continue to hold the torch for Mother 3. But it was nice to be reading this Ask Iwata book, to come across the name and the stories from Shigesato Itoi, and be reminded that, like, oh yeah, that series exists and is beloved by many millions of people. So who knows? Maybe one of these days we can wrap back around to that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Anything else you want to kind of mention in this opening segment before we take a quick break and move on to the next thing?
Nope.
Nothing really I can think of.
I guess not.
I mean,
I love it.
Yeah. The only thing I can think of is just, like, even from a history preservation standpoint, I want Mother 3 over it, just because from an indie game standpoint, I cannot count how many games have been directly or indirectly inspired by Mother 3, so
course.
Being able to have that on Switch, if Nintendo actually decided to care about, preserving its games beyond just the NES and Super NES, then that would be great. But, we'll see. We can keep our fingers crossed, hope that Reggie unlocks that hidden version of the game one day, but we'll see.
Yeah, keep our fingers crossed. And you know what? If you are a fan of, not a fan of, but if you are at all interested in legacies, in history, in video game preservation, especially in regards to Nintendo, which is kind of hit or miss with that kind of stuff, I highly recommend checking out the Ask Iwata book. It's a great read. It's a lot of great Nintendo stories and a really fascinating business philosophy, which was unexpected for me. So I've been really enjoying that. So we're going to take a quick break. We're going to come back. We're going to talk about another old game from the Game Boy Color era. So stay tuned. And we're back, and we are belly dancing our way into a little discussion of a Game Boy Color game called Shantae. Campbell, you've been playing this port for the Switch, is that right?
That is indeed correct, yes.
And this is pretty much just a straight port of the Game Boy Color game, or did they do anything to it?
No, it's pretty much just a straight port. The only things that they added are, well, they have actually added two things that are pretty cool. One is the ability to have save states, which is a lifesaver for reasons that we'll probably get into later.
Always good.
Always good.
I know.
Yeah, I totally agree.
Yeah,
Anyway,
maybe I'm a cheater, but I actually like that stuff. I don't know. And then the other thing they added was the ability to switch between the original Game Boy Color version and the GBA enhanced version of the game.
Yes, wow, I didn't know that they would add that. That's awesome.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't add too much, but it just makes the colors a little brighter,
Makes the colors a little brighter. I believe there was an extra character you can transform into.
Yeah, something. I didn't actually.
Tinkerbell or something.
Yeah, I didn't actually access that, but
Wait, so quick question.
Yeah.
This game was not exclusive to the Game Boy Color? It was on GBA?
Okay, well, the GBA can play Game Boy Color games.
yeah, it was just.
Oh, but how was that able to?
It came
enhance
out. It came out after the GBA released, which was
Oh.
one of the reasons why it was such a commercial flop. Yes, a cult classic. Let's call it that.
Yeah, there we go. Yes, yes.
Well, it's basically the indie origin game.
Essentially, yeah.
Yeah, I guess it is.
Yeah, it has pretty amazing story, honestly, or just the fact that it started out, released on the Game Boy Color in 2002, a year after the Game Boy Advance came out. I believe, if you look at the retrospective sales numbers, it sold almost nothing. But then eventually, it got a sequel on the DS, and the series has been going strong ever since then. So it's amazing to go back to it and see that it was really just such a forward-thinking game for the time, and especially as a Game Boy Color game, on one of the most limited handheld platforms you could develop for at the time, that managed to achieve so much. This game has everything that the series has become so famous for later down the line. It has the colorful characters, a sense of colorful personality, quirky just humor, puns, all that kind of stuff. It's amazing that they actually have it in there. And when I said puns, now you know why I love this series so much.
I was about to be like, I was gonna say, Campbell, I was about to be like, back up. Wait a second. You like this game for the puns? That's very good. Yeah, no, it's one of those very striking Game Boy Color games. Like when you fire it up for the first time, it's a little different now, I suppose, looking back on it, because I imagine I haven't played this game on Switch yet, Campbell, but you have. Do they do that thing where you have the borders on the side of the screen?
Yeah, they do. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, which is like, it's not my favorite aesthetic, but it's understandable. You have to do it because the Switch has kind of an odd what do you call it, aspect ratio?
Yeah, yeah.
Or rather, the Game Boy did for its
time. Fair enough.
Right.
The Game Boy did. Game Boy did. So to transfer games from the Game Boy to the Switch, you're gonna eventually run into that. I believe the Disney Aladdin and Lion King collection had a similar kind of issue.
And
so
I never thought we would be able to mention that game on the podcast.
Oh, listen, I've been waiting for a way to bring that up for weeks,
Beautiful.
my friend.
Didn't even know. Oh, great
Nice.
games.
Great games, but we're not talking about those. We're talking about Shantae. So what I was going to say was, even though it doesn't have that, even though you've got the borders, taking up half the Switch screen, it is a very striking game, especially for considering when it was released. The sprites are really good. The animation is incredible.
Oh yeah.
For a Game Boy game. The way Shantae moves and dances, the way the characters like scramble around, the enemies are very well animated. The hair whipping animation, her basic attack is she whips her very long ponytail at enemies. Like, all that kind of stuff is like pretty stunning from an animation perspective.
It really is. And that's really what so to back up a little bit,
Yeah.
Shantae is one of my favorite game series, just bar none, ever. It's one of the series that actually got me into indie games in particular, and I fell in love with the series for all the aspects that you just mentioned that this original game has. And it's amazing to see what they were able to pull off in later games on the DS, on the Wii U, on the Switch. See all that same level of personality, those animations that they were able to do on powerful hardware, and then to go back to the Game Boy version and see that that was there from the very start. Even on such limited hardware, they were able to do that. I've never played the Game Boy version before. I play every other game in the series, but not this one. So it's amazing to go back, see where it all began, and see just how ahead of its time it really was. It really is a true definition of a cult classic, you know?
Yeah, a very forward-thinking Game Boy Color game for sure. And I love that. So yeah, right before we start recording, we were just talking about how Campbell is apparently the diehard Shantae fan of the podcast, which is great. It's a series I've kind of dipped in and out of over the years. I played the original. I believe at least one or two of them have gone up on PlayStation Plus at some point, so I've kind of messed around with at least one of the sequels. But yeah, to go back to the original and see that it still holds up is very cool, I think.
It is really cool, and especially considering that this is an... You could call it a Metroidvania, or just a very stripped back Metroidvania, perhaps. Maybe more like an exploratory action platformer, maybe. But the fact that it was able to create this open-ended world that gradually unfolds with more abilities that you gain throughout the course of the campaign before, the boom of Metroidvanias later in the 2000s, 2010s, it's still impressive to see just how big of a world it created and just how many different abilities it gave you, how versatile the gameplay was, and just how beautiful it looks as well. So it's just so impressive to go back to it. And there are elements of it that haven't exactly aged well. There are a few things like, for example, traveling around the world isn't always easy because there are times where, fast travel is very limited in this game. Yeah. So there are times where I have to backtrack a lot and it doesn't really give you a lot of shortcuts like modern Metroidvanias might. Or there are times where it has a live system, which is not really fun for modern Metroidvanias or from that modern standpoint, and you can end up losing a lot of progress if you don't save every chance you get or cheat and make use of those save states that you have in the Switch version.
I wouldn't call it cheating.
Oh, yeah.
It's like, for a lot of people experiencing an older game like this, there's a lot of stuff that we put up with back in the day that, frankly, we don't have to deal with anymore.
Exactly.
So it's like, I think it's okay to make use of a save
put it
state.
there for a reason.
Exactly.
They put it there for a reason, guys.
That was my thought. And it's not like I'm just save scumming, and just creating a save state before every difficult part of the game and then just retrying over and over. I just use it whenever it's like, oh, I have a boss fight coming up, and if I die, then I'd have to go back to the save point, which is like an hour away or whatever, So... it's a great level of modern convenience that makes the game a lot more accessible for new players, definitely.
That's awesome. Yeah, it's like, we talked last week about Saga Frontier Remastered and how it's at a very steep learning curve. Obviously, a game like Shantae, it's not a sprawling JRPG, so the learning curve is not quite as high. But I remember still being like, this is pretty hard. Like, for what it is, being like, this is a pretty complex 2D platformer. Like, the way you navigate the world, it's much, much bigger than anticipated. There's all these mini games that are sprinkled throughout that are, like, kind of involved. It's like...
Yeah.
I remember being, the first time I played it, being pretty surprised at the depth, I guess you call it depth, that was mixed into the design of this game.
Oh, I was muted. Yeah, absolutely. Sorry. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Absolutely. There is a lot of versatility to the gameplay. So to kind of back up a little bit for anybody who isn't exactly aware of what the gameplay of this title really is, we've kind of danced around it a little bit.
That's
so
true.
to speak.
Yeah,
We've belly danced around it a little bit.
Aha, yes. That's very good, Campbell.
Yes.
I assume... Every time we talk about an old game like this, I always make the mistake of being like, oh, everybody knows what this is. But yeah, Campbell, why don't you give a brief description as what Shantae actually is?
Yeah, absolutely. So the Shantae series follows the eponymous Shantae, who's a half genie who's protecting this seaside town called Scuttletown in the world of Sequinland. And she has this arch nemesis, who's the lady pirate Risky Boots, who attacks the town one day, trying to essentially build this doomsday weapon to take over the world. And she needs these 4 special stones, essentially, to build that weapon and achieve her goals. And then Shantae just sets out on a quest to get those stones before Risky Boots does. And along the way, She acquires magical abilities that allow her to transform into a number of different animals, essentially, that allow her to do different things. You can transform into an elephant that lets you ram through thin walls, or a monkey that can climb up walls. So you gain those abilities, you explore this world that is interconnected and open. It's not quite like a Metroidvania because it is relatively linear, or perhaps circular, actually, because it all does reconnect to the same town in the end. But it is pretty open-ended. You have to use those abilities to explore more of the world, eventually discover these dungeons, which are honestly my favorite part of the game. The labyrinths they're like miniature Metroidvanias in themselves. These little self-contained areas that are filled with puzzles and enemies to fight, and they have lots of nooks and crannies to discover. There's a lot to explore in them. And that's essentially the game. You explore, you find those dungeons, you get to the boss, you get the stone, rinse and repeat, use your new animal transformations, and keep going. And to imagine that all of this is on a Game Boy game is impressive. It would be impressive for a game made today, and for something from nearly 20 years ago. It's still fun today, even if, we've talked about some of those things that haven't aged quite as well. It's still a lot of fun. And the gameplay is really involved because of those mini games that you talked about, Cameron. The fact that you have to do essentially a mini game to transform into each animal as well, to do these little dances, which take a little bit of time to get used to.
Which I wanted to ask you. So it's interesting. You talk about in any game, you talk about like utility of mechanics, like being able to do. In fact, Iwata talks about this in the Ask Iwata book.
Nice connection, yeah.
It's funny because he talks about how Miyamoto has this philosophy about how solving multiple problems at once, and that's what makes him such a brilliant designer. Is he's often able to come up with a solution that's like, oh well, if we just do this thing, that eliminates the problem of these three other things, whether that's through mechanics or design philosophy or whatever. In Shantae, I feel like one of its weaknesses is that once you get I think it's the harpy costume, maybe even as early as the monkey. Like one of them lets you just fly.
Yeah, that's the harpy. Yeah.
Okay, it's the harpy. Yeah, obviously, and obviously not the monkey. It's not Wizard of Oz.
I mean, the monkey breaks the game in its own way, but
well, that's what I'm saying. So,
it has its own limitations.
You come across these transformations that actually literally break the game, which is both good and bad because it's like, well, why would I ever want to turn to this other animal when I can just turn into this harpy and fly around every enemy I see, or fly up to that secret collectible or whatever. It's like it lets you skip a lot of the platforming in a platform game, which is sort of an interesting choice.
Right.
I don't know. How do you feel about that?
Yeah. Well, the one thing I will say about the harpy is while it technically does break the game, on the one hand, you get it really late in the game. You get it after the last dungeon, right before the final area, and so you really don't have much reason to have to go through the same areas over and over again on foot. It does add some convenience to that. And the other element is, one thing I like about these transformations is that they are all powerful, but they all have limitations of their own as well. The monkey that we were kind of talking about can jump super high, climb on walls, but it is so floaty, and it is so easy to end up falling, jumping high and then falling into a pit and dying instantly. The harpy is really kind of loosey-goosey to control as well. It's not very precise. It's easy, especially if you're in an area that has like instant death spikes. It's easy to jump into those inadvertently. So yeah, I definitely see your point that some abilities kind of break the game a little bit, but I see that in this respect, at least, that it is a Metroidvania that came out before. You had Super Metroid, you had Symphony of the Night come out before then, but it was before the genre was super popular and super well established. So this was probably just its way of making it easier to traverse the environment again without having to go over the same terrain over and over and over again on foot. And I don't know, I enjoyed the convenience of those abilities, being able to just skip over those platforming challenges without having to go through it all over again the same way, rinse and repeat.
No, that's a great point. It's like by the time listen, it's been a while since I've played the original, to be honest. So I guess by the time you do get some of those other transformations, it is kind of a moot point, like you just said. You just kind of use them for cleanup on collectibles, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. The one thing I will say that is a really valid complaint is the fact that there is fast travel in the game, but the fast travel is tied to collectibles that you can find in the dungeons. And if you don't get all
So
the
little
collectibles,
octopuses, right?
yeah, the little warp squids who later went on.
Warp squids.
Yeah. And my favorite thing about that is the way that mechanic works is that there's a warp squid hut in each town in the game. There's 4 towns. And the warp squid is like, oh my gosh, I've lost all my babies. Can you find them for me? So then you have to go find her babies and give them to her. And then she's like, oh, is that my baby? I can't really tell. I'll just assume it's mine. They all look the same. So there's a lot of humor like that.
Yeah.
So if you find enough warp squids, you can create you learn a dance that can instantly transport you back to that town, which is helpful if you find all the squids. And it's entirely possible to miss one or two when you're going through the dungeons. So that means that if you miss one, you can't fast travel back to that town, and it's just a big hassle afterwards that, such a basic functionality as fast travel is tied to something that is possible to miss. I missed one in my playthrough. I couldn't find it for the life of me. I didn't want to look up a guide and go through it. I just wanted to keep going with the game, and it was a big hassle by the end of it. So, that is one limitation that the game has in that area.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think anybody's out here calling it a perfect game.
Yeah,
like
yeah,
obviously it's they were, to its credit, to Matt Bozon and the whole team over at WayForward's credit, they were trying stuff that had never been done before, especially on the Game Boy Color, and some of it works and some of it doesn't. I think it's a great. We talked about preservation, 20 minutes ago.
Mm-hmm.
It's a great opportunity to play this game on the Switch and be like, oh, okay, here's some of the design stuff they were trying with this kind of a game. And
Yeah.
Campbell, like you had just said, it's great to play some of the newer titles and see what they kept and what they didn't keep.
Exactly. See all those little details, the little intricacies of her movement, the fact that, Shantae does this little wiggle when she's crouching down, or the way her dances look, or the ways that the characters emote so fluidly, even in their very limited GBA or Game Boy Color character sprites. It's really impressive. And the one thing that I really especially appreciate looking back on it, I actually found an old comment that Matt Bozon said as he was thinking back on the release of the game, that at the time that it was released, there were very few female protagonists in games at the time.
Yeah,
and
that's true.
he said that this game was too girly for hardcore male gamers to get into, but at the same time too raunchy with her character design for kids to get into. So it was this weird thing that was unlike anything that had been released beforehand. And coming back to it now, seeing that in context, it's really impressive that they were able to create something that was so different and yet so consistent in its unique cartoony vision of what it wanted to be. And to see that and know that the series was able to keep growing and developing through the future is really amazing to come back to that.
Yeah. When did this game come out? Do you remember?
2002.
2002. Oh yeah, the early 2000s. What a time!
Mm-hmm.
What a time to be alive.
This wasn't the last Game Boy Color game, was it?
It's one of them.
It's among them, but it wasn't the last one.
Yeah,
No.
I think
Yeah.
Pokemon Crystal was one of the last, right?
I wouldn't know.
Nor would I.
Yeah.
I'm the Shantae
something
guy, not
like
the
that.
Pokemon guy.
Yeah, definitely.
I do want to say though that the Game Boy Color had some really impressive games.
Oh,
There
absolutely.
were some that people just don't know about because they didn't sell very well. Like one of my favorites is Metal Gear Solid on Game Boy, which is like a sequel that's not canon to Metal Gear Solid on PlayStation. And not only did they fit like that game's entire gameplay onto the Game Boy Color, but like they included 40 bonus VR missions that you could play through on the side.
Dang.
Yeah, it's a wild system. Like looking back at the library of the Game Boy Color and the breadth and depth of stuff that was on there, it's pretty crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of good stuff.
A lot of good stuff on there. Obviously, Shantae does kind of with the hindsight of 20 years, we can kind of look back and be like, oh damn, this game is actually really really good. So I'm glad that it's getting a bit of a second. What do you call it? A second resurgence on the Switch. So that's great. Is there any I'm just curious, Campbell? Is there any extra stuff in there? Or is it just the game?
It's just the game, really. Yeah, I would. That is another kind of complaint I have with it. I didn't see any, like, something as simple as like an art gallery or a soundtrack player, because the music is amazing, as with every other Shantae game and everything else that Jake Kaufman composes. So
There's no like borders or anything like that.
not even borders. It's just
really? That's surprising.
just this one kind of drab texture along the side. It's the same thing that they had with their previous re-release on Switch, which was Risky's Revenge. That one also just had like a picture of like pottery along the side, and you couldn't really switch it out. So I wish I had some borders.
What an odd choice for a series that has such striking art direction.
Exactly. It is weird. I wish that they did have a little more, I guess just a little more care and attention put into it. But for what you have, it is just a really solid version. It's easily the best way to play the game. If you've played any of the other ones, if you've played Risky's Revenge or Pirate's Curse, which are probably two of the best games in the series, if you've played those, want to see where it started out, and you don't mind having a few of those old school inconveniences, this is an awesome way to play it.
Awesome. So do you remember the full title of this game? Is it Shantae and the Pirate's Curse? What is it?
This one's just straight up Shantae.
Is it just Shantae?
This is just Shantae before.
I love it.
Yeah, before she had the Pirate's Curse, before was the Seven Sirens. It's just the original adventure where you can see where it all began.
I love it. Well, there you go. So check out Shantae on Switch, and Campbell, I imagine you'll have a piece up on that soon.
Yeah, hopefully it should be up by the time this podcast goes live.
Incredible. So make sure you check out Campbell's piece on the game over on GoombaStomp.com. We're going to take one more quick break. We're going to come back, get some, perhaps not an indie spotlight, but an indie flashlight for a game that Campbell's been playing. So stay tuned. We'll be right back in a moment. And we are back. So continuing with the Campbell Talks for 45 minutes conceit of this episode, Campbell, you've been playing a little bit of an indie game that it was announced last week during the Nintendo Direct, and now it is out on Switch. So why don't you tell us a couple of first impressions? I know you haven't played a lot of this game. It's meant to be played over the course of 400 days. The Longing.
I've been longing to talk about this one for sure.
There it is.
And I'll be in it for the longing run too. So,
oh boy.
Yeah. Now that I've mortified everybody, this game is so fascinating because, as you just alluded to, Cameron, the whole shtick of it is that it's a game that you don't play, essentially. It's a game about not doing anything. It's where it takes 400 days to play to see through to its conclusion, where you don't have any concrete objectives in mind. It's all about waiting. It's all about biding your time and essentially finding the beauty in the little things is what I'm already seeing in it. So the main idea of this game is that it essentially follows a old German legend about a king who lives underground, and he goes to sleep to restore his powers for 400 days. And as he's sleeping, he has this little shade, this little black creature that has like no distinct features except these beady yellow eyes that are like really expressive, and he just tells the creature to wait for him, and then when 400 days are up, just go and wake him up. In the meantime, just wait. And that's all you do. You take control of this shade, you wander around these massive underground caverns, and you just find ways to bide the time. It is totally acceptable to just start and play the game, then get that counter starting, because there is that 400-day counter ticking at the top of the screen. Even when the game is not being played, it's always counting in real time. You can just pick up the game, start it, set it down, then come back to it in a year and a half, and it's over. Or you can start exploring this cavern and start finding things to essentially explore, finding things to experiment with. You can go around and pick up these little pieces of coal and use those to light a fire in your house and sit by the fire and just kind of bide your time and be all cozy. Or you can find books hidden throughout the labyrinth. And these are actually like real books. You can find Moby Dick and sit down and read Moby Dick in its entirety. And that's one way that you can spend these 400 days. And as you're reading, as the shade is actually enjoying himself, the clock will start to go faster because he's just enjoying himself, losing track of time. So that's essentially what the gameplay loop is. I've only been playing it for a few days, so I'm really only just a fraction of the way through it. But it's just all about very slowly exploring these environments, finding new things to interact with. A lot of these are time-based puzzles. A lot of these are just parts to larger pieces that you uncover either through more exploration or just by waiting. And that's what the conceit of the game is. And it's amazing to think that a minimalist game such as this, something that doesn't actually have that much action would actually keep you engaged. But much like I think the way that people get engaged in these long-term life simulator games or farming simulator games that don't have an overarching objective, but they just keep you coming back each and every day, this game just has this sense of serenity in its minimalism that is really enjoyable and it's really compelling. And I'm very much interested to see how this idea keeps developing.
Yeah,
I have a question.
Oh, please, go ahead.
Do you mean you literally get to read Moby Dick? Like, is there like a selection of like open domain books and it's literally like the full book?
Oh yeah, Moby Dick isn't the only one either. There's also Thus Spake Zarathustra in there.
But it's literally the full book.
It is the full book. You can sit there and read the full book if you want to, or you can set it to auto read, and the shade will read the book while you just set the game aside and you do something else. And then the time passes faster while you're auto reading. I think it's like 10 in-game seconds for every real-world second or something like that.
Okay.
Yeah, so if you want to catch up on your reading, buy The Longing. It has a great library in it.
I'm so curious to see what other books are in the library. Like, obviously, it's got to be all, like Mark just said, it's got to be all
Open domain.
Open domain. Thank you. I couldn't remember the phrase.
Yeah.
It's got to be all open domain stuff. Is there like Shakespeare in there? Do you got like some Milton maybe? Like, what do we got?
Yeah, so the only things that you start out with are Moby Dick, Thus Spake Zarathustra. There's Thoughts by Marcus Aurelius.
Oh wow, that's a good one. Yeah.
Yeah, I know, right? English major time. This game is great for anybody who actually enjoys literature. Really stuffy, pretentious stuff. It's awesome. And you can discover books around the library, around the labyrinth. You can discover little pages strewn about as well. I haven't found any other books just yet, but I know that they're out there. So I'm very much keeping an eye out for those.
So I know this game is kind of like an idle game, but is there stuff to like unlock, say, other books to read or like stuff like that, or is it truly that you just find them randomly kind of strewn about?
No, there are things you can do that start these long-term puzzles rolling, essentially. So for example, you can move very, very, very slowly through the caverns, and you'll find, say, this huge locked door, and you can still tell the shade to open the door. And as he's opening it, he'll say, wow, this door is so rusty and locked in place. It will take me 2 hours to open the door. So then you have to wait 2 hours for the door to open, or you can just go around and do other things. So that's essentially what a lot of these like puzzles are. And then they do have effects on each other eventually. So for example, you can, there's one room where you're looking at like this mosaic on a wall. And as you're looking at it, you can find these like pieces of coal nearby, or these keys, or these like even pieces of paper, all these little items that you find in the environment that you can use to furnish your little room back in your house where you have your library, there are ways for you to open up new sections of the environment, and again, I've only been playing for a little bit, and I'm still waiting to see. First of all, I'm still waiting to see what happens after that door finishes opening after 2 hours. So, that is essentially what you have, though. You set these little pieces in place, and then they kind of have a snowball effect on one another.
Fascinating. So here's a dumb question. So does the game run when you're not actively playing it?
Yup.
Oh, interesting. So, for example, so you've been playing Shantae. So you're playing Shantae, you put a couple hours into Shantae, so the next time you fire up the Longing, it'll be like however many hours later?
Exactly. That I literally had that scenario happen over the weekend where I started playing the game, I wanted to do something, I wanted to tell the shade, this is great functionality actually, where as you're exploring the environment, you can tell the shade to remember these specific areas, and once that shade has remembered them, you can tell them to just walk towards that area automatically. So when you tell them to walk somewhere, you can just close the game, and then by the time that you open it up again, they might be there. So I had that exact moment where I was like, okay, I want to go over here. I'll tell the shade to go back to his room. I told him to do that. I closed the game, played some Shantae for a few minutes, came back to the Longing, and boom, there he was. And like an hour had passed or something like that.
There you go. Yeah.
So it very much takes, it both, forces the player to, wait out that full time, but it also has those conveniences that allow you to like strategically use your time to hang out with it and make the most of the allotted time that you have.
Nice. So I guess the ultimate question is, do you think you're gonna hit the 400-day mark and see what the end of this game looks like?
We're gonna see how far I get. Now there's the thing. There are ways for you to make the game go faster, like I mentioned,
Right.
with the book or with furnishing, and So my hope is that I don't know if I can play this game for a year and a half, but I do know that I'm very interested in seeing how it concludes, because I know there are multiple endings as well that are dependent on your actions. I believe there's even the ability to just straight up leave the labyrinth and leave the old king behind without even waiting the 400 days. So I'm interested to see like what kind of endings I end up stumbling onto. But yeah, I definitely intend to see at least one way for this game to wrap up.
Nice. Yeah, ever since the reveal at the Nintendo Direct, I was genuinely intrigued by what the act of actually playing it would look like. So I'm glad you've been able to put a little time into it.
Mm-hmm. Put in a little time, and I'll put a lot of time into it, whether I'm actively playing it or not. So
there you go. That's really funny. I feel like for a lot of people, it's going to be the kind of game where they pick it up out of curiosity, or they buy it on sale or something, play it for a couple hours, forget about it, and then remember in a year and a half, oh my gosh, the Longing, whatever happened in that, and then turn it on, it'll be like, here's the ending. Like, I feel like that's going to be, do you know what I mean? I feel like that's going to be the thing that happens.
Yeah.
How is the interface when you're reading a book on it?
It's pretty good, actually.
Yeah?
It's just pretty simple. You have the whole text laid out, and you just kind of scroll through it. It's pretty simple. It works okay. I haven't done too much reading myself. I kind of set the shade to auto read most of the time, but I don't know. Call me a fake English major, but I'm not down to sit down and read all of Moby Dick. So
I will call you a fake English major. I'm so sorry.
Wow, you're so cruel, sir. So cruel. But yeah.
So it's the Switch is no Kindle, is what you're saying.
That is exactly what I'm saying. The screen reflects too much. So
yes, fair enough.
Yeah.
Well, at least the option is there. You can read a couple pages at a time.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I don't know. Any other thoughts or questions about The Longing?
Well,
it seems good, but I'm just like, I really want to know the ending, but I don't know if I actually want to play it, and I kind of do.
I think that this is one of those games where you absolutely cannot get the point of it if you're just watching someone play it. If you're just watching,
Right.
the ending cutscene on YouTube. It is the kind of thing where you have to manually move the shade ever so agonizingly, frustratingly slowly down these hallways and up these stairs to really kind of just get into the groove of it and get into like, it's almost like Zen-like when you're actually into it. So it is very much that kind of thing where if you want to get the full experience, if you want to actually see why a game like this exists, you've got to play it. And, you know, again, I've not played a huge amount of it, but from what I've seen so far, it's definitely worth playing for yourself.
Mm-hmm. Also, I looked up the list of books, and there's some interesting stuff on here.
Yeah? I haven't...
Secret Garden, The Raven, Monte Cristo.
Monte Cristo, oh my gosh.
County Monte Cristo, that's a stone cold classic. That's
It
great.
is. That's a meaty one.
Yeah, it has like all 5 volumes.
Oh, that's amazing. That's a long book that I actually have read all the way through. I love that. Oh my gosh. Is Paradise Lost in there?
Let me check.
Yeah, we need some classic poetry in here.
Yeah, give me my John Milton, please.
Let's see.
I took a seminar class about John Milton, not to brag.
So
but,
did
yeah.
I. Oh
No
my God.
way.
Yeah, dude.
Same seas.
It just says Monte Cristo 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
Okay. Count to Monte Cristo 6. That's my favorite entry in the...
Yeah, that's the one where he goes. That's the one where he goes to space. Kind of went off the rails, but
Right. I don't know what Demas was thinking, you know. He became a sci-fi writer.
Yeah, not a lot of people know that about old Alexandre Dumas.
Oh, yeah.
Anywho, with that, before we devolve into more, before we get the BAs in literature talking more about literature, we should probably call it here. So yeah, thanks for sharing with us about The Longing, Campbell. And what do you think? So you probably won't be able to have a full review of that for another year. But do you think you'll write a little about it at some point?
Oh, yeah. I'll have a little impressions piece at some point, you know, probably in the next week or so.
Sounds good. So we'll keep an eye out for that then. So all that being said, we're going to wrap it up here. I've been your host, Cameron Daxon. Thank you so much for listening. You can find some of my writing over at goombastomp.com. I'm writing about something that I can't talk about right now, but stay tuned in a week, and we'll have a nice, meaty review for you. Mark, where can people find you on the internet?
You can find me at the Marc Cal, and of course, that's Mark with a C, Cal with a K. You can find me on Twitter and Instagram and LinkedIn. I wrote something that we will not be talking about for a month or two. So, yeah, look forward to that.
All right, great. Love it. We'll definitely keep an eye out for that. Campbell, where can people find you?
Yeah, you can find my games writing at goombastomp.com. You can keep up with me on social media, on Twitter and LinkedIn. And, of course, check out, again, Goombastomp to read all my articles that I can talk about, such as the upcoming Shantae review and the Longing indie snippets.
Incredible. Of course, you can follow NXpress, the podcast, over on Twitter. We are at NXpress Nintendo. We are also on YouTube as well, so make sure you like, comment, subscribe, all that kind of stuff there, so we show up in the feed. All the more engagement helps us get more listeners, so make sure you please do that. And download the podcast over on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Podbean, anywhere podcasts are streamed. Thank you so much for listening. We'll catch you next time.